Welcome back, everyone. You may have witnessed this interesting spectacle at Davos during the World Economic Forum conference. We watched Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, experiencing a sort of enlightenment. He has discovered that the world order, or what they call the rules-based international order, and the talk of democracy and freedom were all lies. He called it a partial lie. That's a way of trying to exonerate himself, I suppose. But that he has discovered these are all lies. But then we in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, we have been saying that these are lies for more than 2 centuries. And for saying that they are lies, we were treated as terrorists and put to death. Now, these lies have been going on for some time. As I said, at least for 200 years. And in the 19th century, the lie was the civilizing mission of bringing the benefits of European Enlightenment and the civilizational influence of Christianity to our parts of the world. We know what happened through the civilizing influences which led to the German genocide in Namibia, the French genocide in Algeria, and the British genocide in Kenya and Malaya. Millions of people were killed in order to civilize them. For anyone who thought that those bad days were gone, the United States reminded us that it is still very much the same. For instance, under the United States Empire, the civilizing mission was to bring democracy and freedom. For us who are supposed to be lacking this democracy and freedom, and where we disagreed, and where we said we don't need the US brand of democracy and freedom, Washington felt it was necessary to bring democracy on the backs of battle tanks and to drop freedom from 60,000 feet in the sky. Now, this is the lie that Canadian Prime Minister Carney has now discovered. That is good that he has discovered. But the question is, why has he discovered this now? And reading his speech, it's very clear. He says, we have gone wrong. We have moved from the what might be called the straight and narrow. But his appeal is to what he calls the middle powers. By middle powers, he does not specify, but we suspect he is actually referring to Canada, Britain, France, Germany, and perhaps Japan. What he's calling for is for these middle powers to stand together against the United States. And the French president chimed in at Davos and he said, this is not the time for new imperialism. This is not the time for new neocolonialism. By which, of course, he meant that US imperialism has now turned against its allies in Europe. And and naturally, and you would have noticed that the audience at Davos gave him, gave Kani a standing ovation for having discovered the truth that the rest of the world in Asia, Africa, and Latin America has known, as I said, for more than 2 centuries. But why did they suddenly discover this? One, and most important, is to form an alliance against China. For them today, the rise of China is the biggest issue confronting them. Not because China is economically powerful or militarily strong. Their main problem is psychological, because China is the first Asian power to rise to superpower status in the post Second World War period. In fact, one can argue that China is the first Asian superpower to emerge after the end of the Mongol Empire of Genghis Khan in the 13th century. So, what we have is a realization in the West that the old imperial order is now crumbling. So, when Mark Carney said it is no longer possible to continue in the old way, building the rule based international order, and that the rule based international order has collapsed. And here, a word about RBIO, that is the rule based international order. In 2022, in 2022, the former Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, explained what the rules-based international order is. He said it's about the laws and conventions and procedures that were established after the Second World War. But he was very careful to avoid the word the United Nations. And while he was promoting this idea of this vague, unspecified RBIO, the rules based international order, none of them could specify whose rules are supposed to be the basis of this new order. And at that time, the Chinese president, Xi Jinping, intervened. And he said there's only one international order, and that is the rules and laws and conventions built under the aegis of the United Nations. There are no other rules to be considered. And President Vladimir Putin also criticized this notion of a RBIO, which he said is a smokescreen to bring in to operation US laws and procedures as the governing principles for a new world order. And here we must remember that the United States always imagined itself as the inheritor of the British Empire. And like in the British Empire, where the Supreme Court, otherwise called the Privy Council, was the highest court of law, the United States ruling class imagines that the US Supreme Court should be the highest court of law. And we see that demonstrated in the case of the president of Venezuela, Maduro. Maduro was kidnapped, brought to New York, and is being tried under US laws for crimes supposedly committed in Venezuela. Now, this is a rare and a new interpretation of the law, which was tried earlier in the case of the former president of Panama. But this time, it is more systematic. What they are trying to do, from what I can see in the United States, is to establish precedences where US law is applied to other countries at the whim of the US courts. And of course, laws are merely words on paper. How does one make the law stick? For that, one needs a military infrastructure. And for the United States, NATO was the military infrastructure through which it intended to enforce the US laws across the world. The fly in the ointment is, of course, China. They are unable to neutralize China. And the other major obstacle are the Russians, who staggered out of the ashes of of the crumbling Soviet Union and have now emerged as a major world power. Now, the United States and its European allies are struggling to come to terms with this reality. How does one now continue with the rule-based international order? And that is the point that Carney was making. We cannot any longer go on the basis of this nebulous rules-based international order in which nobody really knows what the rules are except Washington. And therefore, he is really calling for a new order in which the countries, and here, of course, it means the Western countries, can together form an association either in alliance with the United States or on their own. But what is interesting here is that Canada was part of the Five Eyes espionage network. The Five Eyes still are Britain, United States, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. So Britain and its four settler colonies have formed this Five Eyes espionage network, which has been in operation for decades and has been the backbone of NATO intervention in Iraq and in Afghanistan, providing valuable intelligence information. Now, even that seems to be in some jeopardy because Canada, being a member of the Five Eyes, is obviously rethinking its position. And if that is correct, if my assumption is correct, it seems like the United States is now having a problem with rebellions within its ranks, rebellions of a very serious kind. And if they are going to end or weaken the Five Eyes uh, framework, now that is a major blow to US imperialism. So we'll have more to say next time. Thank you very much for being here, and goodbye.